Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to plunge right into some complex ideas, try and pull out the surprising truths hiding just beneath the surface.
Mhm.
You know those conversations, the ones that feel like touching an electric fence,
Yeah.
especially around big concepts like empathy or maybe truth. You try to engage and bam,
Yeah.
suddenly it's just a clash of viewpoints.
It's so easy to get caught in the sound bites, isn't it? And these, really simplified stories.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And Horrocks argues that's exactly why what we're doing today is, well, pretty crucial.
Right. Because genuine understanding just gets lost in all that noise. It feels like everyone's just talking past each other sometimes.
Exactly. So today, we're tackling a really powerful rebuttal to a perspective that's, well, it's very popular, often quite loud.
We're going to be exploring the insights from a piece called Not Empathy, but Power, a leftist rebuttal to the Gospel of Cruelty. It's by Jamie Horrocks, Ph.D.
And our mission today really is to unpack Horrocks' argument. It's a pretty profound challenge to how we usually understand things like empathy, sin, power.
Yeah, and they bring this unique viewpoint, a trans autistic Marxist lens, to look at what they actually call the gospel of cruelty.
So this deep dive, it's about trying to rewrite the script, on what we're really discussing when these ideas come up.
Moving beyond that simple left versus right box.
Right, inviting us to see the whole landscape from, well, a really different angle. So let's dig in.
Yeah.
So to really get Horrocks' critique, we first need to understand the specific perspective they have.
Right. Jamie Horrocks, Ph.D. They state right up front that their background being trans, autistic, and Marxist often gets explicitly left out of these big mainstream conversations.
That's a key point.
And another thing they mention, which I found really interesting, is that they're not looking for a flame war. They're not after debate night singers.
No quick sound bites.
Exactly. They mention being an autistic Gestalt language processor, meaning they process language in chunks and patterns, not word by word. So they say they live in meaning clusters, not sound bites, which means this piece isn't just a reply, it's a much longer form rethinking of what they call a persistent terrain that just structurally excludes voices like theirs.
That's critical, isn't it?
It's
Now,
just
see, they're not just arguing points. They're coming from a whole different framework where, context and how things connect are really central.
And that leads straight into how they reframe the whole discussion right away.
Yeah, they say this isn't your typical left versus right thing or Democrat versus Republican.
No, instead, the piece frames it as cruelty versus justice.
Cruelty versus justice. That really sharpens the focus, doesn't it?
It does. If it's not the usual political binary, then what is it? Well, the central idea they put forward is that for some people, this deep discomfort bubbles up when faced with true empathy.
What do they mean by true empathy here?
The kind that disrupts hierarchies and softens hardened hearts. That's how they put it.
Okay.
And the piece really emphasizes this kind of empathy isn't seen as weak or toxic by those it threatens. It's seen as a threat precisely because it challenges the existing power dynamics, the status quo.
That's a really radical reframe. And it sets the stage perfectly for how Horrocks then starts to dismantle what they see as this false binary driving a lot of the culture war stuff.
Right. The author argues that someone like Allie Beth Stuckey, her framework relies on this binary. You've got the righteous conservative on one side.
And on the other.
The unhinged progressive corrupted by empathy. That's the caricature.
Okay, so Horrocks offers a counter-argument to that.
A really strong one. They argue that the progressive Stuckey is often critiquing. They're frequently centrist liberals, professional class virtue managers, corporate Democrats, and nonprofit staffers.
So not the radical left image.
Not at all. Horrocks actually calls these groups the loyal opposition, suggesting they might actually help stabilize the very system Stuckey claims to be fighting against.
Wow, okay, that really flips the script on who the players are supposed to be.
It does. And so Horrocks asserts the actual left, people who are socialists, abolitionists, anti-colonial, they get rendered invisible.
Why invisible?
Because, according to the piece, they refuse to play the roles the culture war assigns them. They're not just looking for, better marketing for empire.
They want to dismantle the whole thing.
Exactly. Dismantle the logic of domination itself. That's the quote. It suggests a completely different goal.
Okay, so that helps connect the dots then. Horrocks is claiming the fear of empathy. It isn't really about feelings being misplaced.
No, not fundamentally. It's about the refusal to other one another. It's about building solidarity.
And solidarity is seen as
as a material revolutionary force, something that actually destabilizes everything she's been told to protect. Because if people understand each other, share experiences, well, that can undermine systems of control.
Right. Okay, let's zero in on a specific line from Allie Beth Stuckey that Horrocks really focuses on. Empathy becomes toxic when it affirms sin.
Yes. And this is where Horrocks brings in a pretty detailed theological rebuttal, drawing quite heavily on Scripture.
Okay, how do they reinterpret those texts?
Well, it's fascinating. Horrocks points out that Jesus, in the Scriptures, moved with compassion, using the Greek word splachnizomai.
Splachnizomai, okay.
Which is apparently rooted in the gut, like the deepest place of feeling, a visceral thing.
So not just a surface emotion.
Exactly. It was this direct, gut-level response to suffering. And crucially, without asking first if the person, deserved it.
Right. No means testing for compassion.
Precisely. And similarly, they point to the prophets who wailed and lamented with the people who were harmed. They called judgment on the powers that devoured the poor, not just individuals committing personal sins.
So it reframes compassion as something active, aligned with justice, almost political in a sense.
Yes, very much so. And Horrocks also notes the core Christian message: God with us, not God above us or disgusted by us.
Okay.
So they argue declaring someone else's gender or their body or their path as sin, while you elevate your own certainties, that's actually a form of idolatry. It's hubris.
It really asks you to question who benefits from making those kinds of declarations.
Absolutely. And if empathy is toxic, then what about cruelty? Horrocks makes this really strong statement. Cruelty is not a moral stance. It's a tactic of empire.
Wow. That flips it completely.
Yeah.
Reframes cruelty from a personal failing to, an instrument of control.
Exactly. A tool used by powerful systems. They argue that big historical powers like Rome, they didn't fear compassion itself. They feared shared suffering.
Why shared suffering?
Because people who feel with each other, they stop cooperating with domination. They refuse the death machine its lubrication. That's the powerful imagery used. Cruelty keeps people divided and compliant.
It's framed as a dangerous interruption to oppression. It's provocative.
It really is. And Horrocks pushes the listener, pushes you, with some tough questions here.
Like what?
Like, if your faith requires you to hold back love, is that really faith? Or is it control? And if simply affirming someone's basic humanity is labeled the worst sin, well, who taught you that, and what did they gain from it?
It really forces you to examine the roots of those beliefs.
Definitely.
Okay, so the piece then shifts gears a bit, introducing this idea Horrocks calls Madison Avenue morality.
Yeah, this is another really interesting angle. The argument here is that the so-called gospel of traditional values, It isn't actually divine. It's more like a product.
A product, like manufactured.
Exactly. Carefully constructed by post-war American marketing, Madison Avenue stuff.
Can you give some examples they use?
Sure. They offer really concrete ones, like pink was for girls because it moved merchandise.
Ah, okay. Not because of anything inherent.
Right. Or domestic femininity was exalted because it justified labor-saving devices for the home.
Selling washing machines, basically.
Kind of, yeah. And similarly, masculinity was narrowed to aggression and stoicism because it sold trucks and razors and war. It makes you think about how much these ideas we see as natural were actually sold to us.
So Horrocks looks at Stuckey's worldview through this lens. It's a kind of brand.
Very much so. They describe it as aspirational branding that gets monetized on Glenn Beck's Blaze TV merch page.
Oof. They actually cite specific merchandise.
They do. Things like a 44 Turtle t-shirt, a 68 Kohler crew neck jumper, even a $5 sticker declaring self-love won't save you. It's a very direct critique of how these values are packaged and sold.
And what about the ideals themselves, the femininity and masculinity being promoted?
Horrocks offers a sharp critique there, too. The femininity is described as something impossible without a ring light, suggesting it's artificial, unattainable, commercialized.
Right. And the masculinity.
That demands a permanent posture of conquest. Again, quite performative and maybe aggressive.
So the conclusion is?
That the gospel of Sears is not the gospel of Christ. That's the line. And empathy becomes threatening in this view because it interrupts the sales pitch.
How so?
Because empathy makes you stop and ask, wait, what have these roles actually cost us? Personally, as a society, it breaks the spell of the brand.
Okay, so this commercialization links directly to Horrocks' critique of what they call the gospel of the strong hand, where power itself becomes the main virtue.
Exactly. Horrocks sees Stuckey's framing of power as basically Coercion, scrubbed until it shines, making force look righteous.
And how does Horrocks say this plays out in the real world?
They give some pretty stark examples. Within this logic, they argue things like ICE raids become moral acts. State violence is sanctified. And they offer this really pointed contrast. A trans child asking to be seen is sin, but deporting that same child, that's justice.
Wow, that's jarring.
It is. And even, say, Trump's cruelty in this framework, Horrocks argues it gets interpreted as evidence of his truth-telling. Because he's strong, he's not backing down, power justifies itself.
And the piece brings in a specific example related to Stuckey's praise for John MacArthur.
Yes, a very specific and, frankly, disturbing one. They detail the abuse scandal at Grace Community Church under MacArthur.
What do they claim happened there?
Horrocks alleges that victims were silenced, perpetrators were protected, women were told to stay with abusive husbands.
Seriously.
That's the claim. And those who refused, they were excommunicated, cast out by the church.
That really raises some deeply uncomfortable questions.
Profoundly uncomfortable. And Horrocks asks very plainly, if empathy for people who are oppressed is toxic, then what word do you use for reveling in their erasure? What do you call the celebration of cruelty when it's done in your God's name? It really challenges you, the listener, to confront the moral calculus of positions that dismiss empathy.
Shifting focus again slightly, Ally Beth Stuckey often talks about the importance of clarity. How does Horrocks respond to that?
With another really powerful counter-argument, Horrocks suggests this call for clarity isn't actually about illumination. It's a weapon deployed not to illuminate, but to divide.
A weapon? How so?
Well, from Horrocks' perspective, this specific kind of clarity is really about the preservation of a familiar order.
What kind of order?
Specifically, they name it as white suburban comfort, styled as sacred truth. So it's a clarity that serves a particular group's comfort and worldview, not necessarily universal truth. It's about maintaining something familiar.
And Horrocks offers an alternative to this imposed clarity.
Yes, a very different way of seeing things. They say what she calls confusion is in fact complexity. And complexity is not failure. It's not sin. It is a sacred condition.
Complexity is sacred. That's interesting. Do they give an example?
They do, drawing on their own lived experience again. They talk about autistic and trans embodiment.
How does that relate?
As examples of realities that just refuse to fit into neat, simple categories. This kind of embodiment, Horrocks argues, doesn't reject truth, it actually expands truth. It insists on a world that can hold more than one story at a time.
So it challenges the idea that holiness or truth has to be simple and fixed.
Exactly. It suggests truth is maybe much bigger, messier, more complex than these calls for simple clarity allow.
So while Stuckey emphasizes certainty,
Horrocks contrasts that with their view of the Christian promise, which they describe less as certainty and more as things like presence, wilderness, wrestling, cloud and fire, the Holy of Holies veiled, not spotlighted.
painting a picture of faith that embraces mystery, struggle, the unknown.
Yes, exactly. Not easy answers shined under a spotlight.
And this section ends with another powerful reframing.
It does, Horrocks says. What she calls deviation, I call testimony. What she calls a threat, I call a gift.
Wow. That completely flips the perspective on difference and nonconformity. Seeing them not as problems, but as sources of wisdom.
Yes. Challenging you to see them that way, too.
Okay, so finally, the deep dive kind of circles back to empathy, but reclaiming it, right? Not as weakness, but as something else.
Exactly. As a practice of revolutionary faith, Horrocks repeats their definition. Empathy isn't just softness or indulgence.
What is it, then, in their view?
It's moral alignment with the harmed. It's shared struggle. It's the engine of justice.
The engine of justice. That's a powerful phrase. It positions empathy as active, forceful.
Very much so. Tangible, a force for change. And Horrocks explains why it's revolutionary in this view.
Why?
Because it threatens hierarchies, it interrupts profit, it refuses to treat people as disposable. It's basically a call to action that comes directly from connection and understanding.
And they link this idea, empathy, to concrete practices.
Yes. Things like mutual aid, abolition, collective care. Seeing these not just as nice ideas, but as the actual foundations for building a different world where the theory meets the pavement, so to speak.
Right. And there's a really fascinating parallel drawn between the historical Jesus and socialism.
Yeah, the socialist tradition. It's a bold comparison. Horrocks looks at scripture and points to examples where Jesus taught radical redistribution or denounced the temple elite, the powerful religious establishment of the time.
Okay.
Things like fed people without means testing, healed without billing, actions that prioritize need over status or ability to pay.
Right.
They even bring up communal ownership, like in the Qumran community, that ancient Jewish sect known for sharing property. Horrocks sees that as closer to a socialist workers' cooperative than, say, a modern church that might have a super PIC.
That's quite a contrast they're drawing with contemporary religious institutions.
A stark one. Horrocks describes many modern churches as functioning like political machines, hoarding capital and laundering ideology whilst retaining their tax-exempt status. It really highlights what they see as a huge gap between the historical figure and current practice.
And the main point about the historical Jesus here is
that he lived solidarity. He actively took sides.
With whom?
With the poor, the sick, the criminalized, the abandoned. And Horrocks defines this act of taking sides not as toxic or divisive, but as revolution, breaking through. It encourages a really critical look at what faith means in action.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's go back to that powerful closing argument from Horrocks.
Right. Ally Beth Stuckey's ultimate warning, that empathy leads people to validate lies.
And Horrocks responds directly to that.
Very directly and very personally. They assert, what you call a lie is my lived body. What you call sin is our survival. What you call empathy, I call love.
That's quite a counterstatement.
Yeah.
Deeply personal.
It really is. And Horrocks also, just briefly, contextualizes Stuckey's platform, mentioning Blaze TV, Glenn Beck, describing that media ecosystem as anti-trans, anti-reason, and increasingly post-truth.
Why mention that context?
To frame it as a system that sells certain narratives, like patriarchy is peace, that wealth is wisdom, that empire is Eden, it helps you understand the bigger picture Horrocks is pushing back against.
Okay. So that leaves us and leaves you, the listener, with a final thought to maybe carry forward from this.
Yeah, Horrocks ends with this really poignant question, something to really chew on.
What is it?
What does it mean for a faith to not require enemies to feel real?
That's a challenging thought.
It is. And also, how might care when it refuses to look away, really look at suffering and empathy when it breaks with obedience to established norms? How might those things actually dismantle the systems we live in?
It leaves you with a lot to think about, doesn't it? About power, about faith, and fundamentally about what it really means to connect with each other.